Hello everyone, Kevin Carrillo here, and welcome to another episode of the Cannabinoid Connect podcast. My guest today is Cich, co-founder and president of Sunderstorm. Cich, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great today. Thank you. Beautiful here in California.
I was going to ask what the weather is. You mentioned before we started recording that you're in the Bay Area, and I'll tell you what, here in Dallas, Texas, it's very gloomy and cold. So we are definitely seeing the weather change out here.
You know, I will say this morning is one of the first times that there was a little crispiness in the air. So we've had unseasonably warm weather this late into the fall, as you can see by our fires, etc. So the climate is changing.
Yes, absolutely. Well, hey, for those listening, as I mentioned, I have Cich on. He's the co-founder and president of Sunderstorm. They self-distribute over 500 retail locations throughout California and a pioneer in introducing nano-tech products in the cannabis industry. Keith, before we jump into Sunderstorm and your role within the company, I first want to let the audience get to know you a bit better. So from what I understand, you spent more than a decade on Wall Street before transitioning to the cannabis industry. So two questions. One, what made you make that transition? And two, how does Wall Street, the pace of Wall Street compared to the cannabis industry?
Your second part is a great question. I'll tackle that second. So yeah, I was on Wall Street, worked for a big company. I left and really was a principal in a small company. And, you know, the pace was frenetic. And I think while I enjoyed it, I think after looking back on it after a decade, I just felt it wasn't filling my soul. It wasn't kind of that meaning of life, kind of career. And so I took a 180-degree opposite turn and came out to San Francisco and got a degree in philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness, which is really looking at how we see the world through our unique lens. Science has a certain viewpoint on reality. Religion has a certain viewpoint on how we live our lives. So for me, it was really just an opportunity for self-improvement and kind of looking at the world in a really big context. During that time, I traveled through Asia for at least a year.
I got to pause you right there. I just got to say, because it excites me when you talk about your studies and you know that macro view of understanding the world from a particular lens. A little bit about my background. I was a double major in political science and sociology, and I really took that approach also. I really thought that if you could understand where someone grew up and how they were socialized and what values were instilled within them, and you can kind of utilize that as a map to understand their political beliefs and their different ideologies and whatnot. Not for everyone, right? You don't want to blanket it, but there are some common trends and different patterns that you can put together and understand people in a more macro way. So that's very interesting.
I mean, we are all programmed, right? We're a function of, the family we grew up in, the part of the country we live in, the part of the city we live in, maybe even which block we're on. And, I think as you become an adult and you kind of wake up a little bit to the world around you and you see, wow, maybe I don't believe, everything that either the government tells me or any particular group. And it really forces you to grow up, right? I mean, you have to be responsible for your own belief systems. And how do you go about that as an adult? And, I took the path of immersing myself in studies because I'm really kind of education focused. Travel, I think, was actually as important as anything. As I was mentioning, I traveled for at least a year through Asia and did not spend time in big cities. We were off the beaten track, kind of studying Taoism, Buddhism, Hinduism, seeing the great sites, and having worked on, you can imagine working in New York for Wall Street. I mean, we could go out to the finest dinners and order a $500 bottle of wine, et cetera. And now you're in a small village in northern Thailand, and life is very, very different. And I really felt like it was really an incredible opportunity for me to grow as a person and to see the world in a much bigger way. And I hope to carry that, spirit into our company, over time as well, which is always a challenge, bringing that kind of higher consciousness to business. But it's something that I really making a strong point to learn about and try to introduce.
And as you discovered that higher consciousness, is that also during the time when you discovered cannabis, or had you previously had experience with cannabis? When did that happen?
Yeah, I mean, I've been a cannabis user for decades, since in high school. And, in high school, I was a pretty regular cannabis user. I was also president of the senior class, and I was, an athlete. So it really opened my eyes to the fact that, cannabis isn't this kind of evil thing. It's just another tool you have going through life. And it allows you to see the world in a different way. And it goes back to kind of this perspective we have. I think, when I sit out in the parking lot or wherever and share a joint, I think people there have a particular viewpoint that's unique that you don't find when you're in the boardroom in New York.
Right. Yeah. And actually, I was the class president also of my high school, so we have a couple of things in common here. This is good. But I totally agree in that, with cannabis and utilizing it as a tool, it really helps to kind of open your perspective and be more self-aware and self-conscious, not only of what you're saying, but what also you're engaging with. Right. So when you talk about this higher consciousness and incorporating it with in business, I mean, you look at corporate America, that's a well-oiled machine, right? It's and I've had my experience firsthand working with companies like Sabre and Dell and AT&T. And so how would you kind of take that approach in bringing that higher consciousness and that higher perspective into a corporate environment?
I think one really is interpersonal, relationships. I feel like in a company environment, it's easy to look at people as cogs in a machine, and kind of treat them that way, perhaps. I'm having a master's degree, that was partly oriented towards psychology. I think, allows me to sit back and listen a little bit more and try to understand where the other person is coming from, not just on the subject we're talking about, but kind of overall, trying to build a bridge there to make a connection so that it's not just all business, but that, we share certain values about the world, and that our company is about, bringing those shared values out into the world. And I think that's one thing that I've tried to make, an effort on, and I think can succeed even in a corporate environment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and another thing just to add to that would be removing the bureaucracy, right? I mean, in some cases, it seems like your skill set and the value that you're adding doesn't necessarily outweigh like playing the game, and saying it in that way, like, or going with the decision when you may know it's not right, or, so I think that also could be taken into account, especially within the cannabis industry, as it's barely starting to grow and kind of construct itself.
I think business for many years is really all about competition. I would call that kind of a Cold War mentality, us versus them. I think in the last, 10 or 20 years, since psychology has become a bigger part of who we are as a nation and a people, I think we see opportunities for cooperation, and that the world is not all black and white. It's not just Soviet and US military. The world is absolutely a shade of gray in between. And we need to rise to see the gray and try to get out of this perspective that it's either or. And trust me, I am so ingrained with kind of a Wall Street mind that I have to catch myself from getting into that either or mentality. So, I have a deep operating system that I'm working on daily, that I've worked on for 20 years, and still there's huge faults with how I'm viewing the world. So it's very sophisticated and challenging.
Mm-hmm. And then just last question on this topic, and then we'll switch gears. But like, what was the feedback and response that you got from your Wall Street colleagues when you did this 180 and went into cannabis?
Um, so when I left Wall Street, I actually did the 180 and got a degree in this funky think tank in San Francisco. And most people were like shocked, like, why are you doing this? You're at the prime earnings point in your life. Like, you're crazy. And I'll tell you why I did it, because I was working on a bond trading desk. I was one of the principals, and one of the guys in our desk just made more money this past year than he had ever made in his career, and he was more stressed out. His face was red. It was all about buying the ski place up in Vermont. Like, I just looked at that and said, it's too stressful. It's just not the direction that I personally want to head, nor do I think it's really a healthy direction for anybody. So, quality of life is the most important thing we have, and certainly health and positive consciousness are the main components of that.
Yes, amen to that. Well said. I couldn't agree more. Um, well, so switching gears a little bit, let's talk specifically about some current issues that are happening, especially when it relates to the industry. So, um, first off, we've seen both governors of New Jersey and New York openly supporting cannabis legalization. I think that we saw, Cuomo featured in an article, and then the New Jersey governor tweeting something. Arizona's on the ballot also for legalization. So, and then we got the presidential race, which is less than a week. And when this airs, it'll be in a number of days. So what do you kind of envision the outcome looking like? And based on your experience in Wall Street, what does the stock market look like when it relates to cannabis?
Yeah. First, I would say that I think we're past the tipping point. I think the tipping point really occurred sometime in the last 2 years, where a majority of states voted for medical, and honestly, I think it's the only issue that Republicans and Democrats agree on, is that medical marijuana is healthy and people should have access to it, and the states should tax it, and the states should make some money from it. So I think we generally have agreement in this country. Clearly, there is an old guard that is controlling the Senate today that is against pushing any of these bills forward, such as the MORE Act, which gives states the responsibility of kind of governing it itself. So it's not a full legalization; it's more of a decriminalization approach. And then what we really need as an industry is safe banking. The fact that we have all this cash moving around is really unsafe for our employees, and I'm not a fan of that. So we need to move and have banks not be reprimanded by the Federal Reserve, so that they can actually offer banking services. So if the Democrats win, which is what it's looking like, then it becomes a question of the Senate, and I would say that's an unknown today, but it's possible the Democrats could take the Senate. Then I think we're going to have a quick push for decriminalization, and there won't be this wave of legalization probably for a couple of years. In some ways, that could be positive for the industry. Companies like ours grew up organically in California. We didn't come from Nestle's or a big company.
But just to pause you there. So I've heard that that scenario a couple of times now with some previous guests that I've had, and then that is the Democrats winning, they take over the Senate, and we'll see some decriminalization, some legalization policies pushed through. To play devil's advocate, if they don't take the Senate and they don't win the presidency, do you envision? I mean, Trump is, as we know, he makes crazy kind of moves very quickly, right? And they're kind of unexpected. So if it were flipped and there was a different outcome, could you see President Trump making that move at some point in his 4-year term?
Not in the first half of the term. It's interesting. My accountant said that if Trump was down in the polls going in the election, he would pull out the marijuana card to try to even up the stakes. He's not doing that. In fact, he was on record last week as censoring some media outlets for actually saying that he had pro-cannabis statements, and those pro-cannabis statements were from a few years back. So I don't think his thinking around this subject is changing today.
Okay, yeah. I mean, and especially as a nationwide issue, I mean, we're seeing the Democrats kind of speak to it more. I don't know if it's a politicizing it as a political move during this election, but at least it's good to see that that is progressing. But I think, like you said, whatever the outcome is, we're going to learn more with whatever administration takes over. It's going to be interesting.
I mean, like I said, we're past the tipping point. I mean, cannabis is moving towards legalization, unquestionably. Just like gay rights move towards, legalization, just like, having African Americans have the same rights as the rest of our citizens, we're moving in that direction. Are any of those perfect? No, right? We're still, I think Black Lives Matters is absolutely the most important thing that's happened in 2020. I'd say COVID is here today, but COVID will go. I mean, maybe a year, I don't know when. But I think the fact that, Black lives have been treated unequally for hundreds of years is a long-term arc. And the arc of truth is towards freedom. So the arc of cannabis is absolutely towards legalization. It's just a question of speed. I don't think in either case, we're going to get legalization in the next year or two. I think with Democrats, it could come in a year, in maybe 2 years. And with, I think, Republicans, we're talking more like maybe 4 years towards the end of Trump's second term.
Well, and you talk about this path of progression, right? I agree with you. I mean, it's just a matter of time where cannabis will be federally legal, whether it's the states that overturn it or if it's the federal government itself who overturns those laws. But what I'm still like concerned about, and you mentioned it, is this the issue of the banking laws, right? And the fact that the Safe Banking Act has not been passed yet. I know that it's been included in the HEROES Act, which is the COVID stimulus package that the House put together, but of course it's being put on hold or not being pushed through the Senate. So where do you envision that kind of being passed? Will that be a policy that stands alone on its own once a president is determined, and how long do you think that'll take?
I think if there is if there's a Democrat administration and Senate, I think safe banking will pass in the next year. I think that's really one of the number one priorities that the Democrats have. Here in California, the state Democratic, we're very, Democrat driven. They've looked at starting up a state bank, and it was just too costly and would take too long to do that to accommodate cannabis. I mean, people need to understand why banking is an issue. So the Federal Reserve follows the federal law that cannabis is illegal. And even if you're a small credit union, when you wire money between banks, it uses the Federal Reserve system. So you're a hostage to their laws. Now, there is banking that has come up. So some credit unions and others take extra special due diligence safeguards. So there is a limited form of banking for cannabis companies. The problem is that it's expensive. It's expensive and challenging to put cash into the bank. And quite frankly, we don't have purchasing what needs to happen is that the person that walks into the retailer needs to use a credit card so that cash never even starts in the system, right? It starts with digital cash, and then the brands like us are paid for cash, and then we can pay our employees, in digital bank currency, and then we can pay our employees in bank currency. So it has to start at the retail level, allowing merchant processing.
Got you. Yeah. Well, and along this line of this path to freedom, another issue that I know that you may not be as close to it because you're so focused on the cannabis THC side, but on the hemp side with the FDA guidelines, right? And the fact that there's no consumer oversight for hemp-derived products such as CBD and other things. So when I say it's been hindering freedom, or that path to freedom, is because a lot of these brands can't even promote or market online. They can't, Facebook, Twitter, these companies are banning their posts and whatnot because it's cannabis related. And of course, at the federal level, it's Schedule 1. So what do you see happening there? I mean, that is an issue where hemp is legal at this point. That's not, so why do you think they're not moving as quickly there?
So when the Congress passed the Farm Act, which, quote, made hemp legal and took it off being a Schedule I drug. They then turned over.
Why? How can you say air quotes? For those listening, it was air quotes. Why do you say that? It is legal in Texas. They're harvesting their first grow season, right? So
They are, but they turned over regulation of it to the FDA, and the FDA, 18 months later, has not come up with any regulations on ingestibles. So while it's quote descheduled, it's not actually legal to make gummies in California that are hemp-based CBD and sell them in California. Does it happen? It happens, in 1,000 locations in California. So we still have this gray market situation where things are not legally approved, actually.
well, so it is legal, but what you're saying is the FDA doesn't see it as being legal due to the Schedule 1 listing of THC.
Yeah, so think of it as a bowling alley, right? They knocked down a few pins with the Farm Act, and that was including deschedulization, right? But it didn't actually allow for the positive production and sale of hemp-based CBD products in most states in this country. So they're still constrained. You're still like hand-tied.
Right. Yeah. That's what we're waiting on from the FDA is that consumer oversight. So, let's talk a little bit about how that is feeding into the illicit market, right? Because I work as a broker here in Texas for hemp, right? Because it's legal in Texas, and so as I'm approaching these different farmers and whatnot, I'm seeing that the prices for this flower per pound is just fluctuates. It's all over the place. And it's because, to your point, a lot of those thousands of retail shops that you mentioned are all over California and frankly, all over the nation, I think are buying this product at a low quality, low cost to fill their shelves when there's really, great product that farmers and other wholesale sellers are sitting on.
So a year or two ago when CBD water came out, we tested the CBD water, and 3 out of 4 of them had no CBD in them. So given that there's no lab testing requirement, there's no regulation, the products, 3/4 of the products are kind of are almost fraudulent. And so it's a crapshoot when you go in and you buy something, whether it's actually going to work for you.
Right. Which is, again, it just comes up almost every episode, is that the need for federal regulation, which again is sitting on the desk of the FDA. I heard that they did submit some draft plans to the White House management office, but no public, has seen any type of evidence or what they're, putting forward. So I guess we'll learn more in the coming weeks about that, but hopefully it happens soon. So let's talk about anything else we want to talk about in terms of the illicit cannabis market, at least maybe on the THC side. I know that California, and this has been kind of echoed on the podcast, that the taxation and the rates are kind of high to where it's difficult to operate, and the illicit market is undercutting. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I mean, the statistics say that 3/4 of the THC market in California is illicit. And, surprisingly, the state has not had a real strong arm to go and close illicit retailers. There's still 1,000 that exist around Los Angeles. So it's a big issue. And again, we go in and we test, the products in the illicit market, and they contain pesticides way above the level that's safe. The vape pens still have, dilution agents in it that are not really healthy to be smoked. And the potency is not what is on the package. So we're really trying to encourage people to go to the licensed market because, during a time of COVID, when health is an issue, you really want to make sure that the product that you're putting in your body has been lab tested, is free of pesticides, and is really giving you the potency that you want. I mean, this is a drug, right? I mean, it has a strong impact. And if, you think you're buying something that's 20 milligrams of THC and it's really 40 or it's 5, well, it's not going to really perform very well for the condition you want. if you've got a target dosage. So we're really trying to encourage people to move to the licensed market. We have talked to different California senators about lowering taxes. That is very difficult to achieve. So I think it's going to take really enforcement from state regulatory bodies to really crack down on the illicit market.
That makes sense. Yeah. And those, that quality treatment and the best practices when you're producing the product is key. And that seems like what Sunderstorm's bread and butter really is. So let's talk about your family of brands, which include Kanha, Wind, and Nano.
Yeah. So we're a manufacturer and we sell wholesale. So we're not a retailer. We don't cultivate. We don't extract. We basically buy beautiful quality oil that's all pesticide free. And we're kind of like a gummy, a Willy Wonka gummy factory. So most of our sales are under our flagship brand, Kanha Gummies. That's Kanha. Through the first half of this year, we were the #1 selling gummy in California. So we're one of the top edibles companies in the most competitive market really in the world for cannabis products. We also have a line of vapes called Wind. And we have a nano tincture that you spray under your tongue called Nano 5. So, but primarily we're Kanha gummies. And, what really, we started in 2015 and really kicked in Kanha gummies in early 2016. So we are one of the older legacy brands in California. And what really has separated us from the pack is that early on we invested in automation. And what automation allows is for kind of a perfect gummy to be made every time. So our gummies have exactly 10 milligrams or 5 milligrams of THC. So it kind of took out that stoner roulette game of going to the local park and buying a brownie, which was great because that was the only game in town. But now I think people, edibles have taken off because of precision dosing. And I think Sunderstorm has been a leader in precision dosing. In fact, we won the award from the largest lab testing company in California called Cannabis last year for having the most accurately dosed and accurately formulated edible. So we're all about having customers come to the Kanha gummy brand and they have the same experience no matter where they buy the product throughout the state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, precision dosing, especially as it relates to edibles, is so important. So that's a huge differentiator for y'all in the industry. And another thing that you mentioned, I want to dive a bit deeper on, and we can talk technology trends more broadly. But it's that nanomolecular technology that you mentioned for your what is it? Your sublinguals. So what is that technology and how does it differ from the traditional technology when making these sublinguals?
Yeah. So most sublinguals are simply MCT oil, which is coconut oil, in a small jar. And then you put in, THC oil, distillate, or full spectrum oil inside it. And you basically mix it up. And then you take that as a dropper and put that under your tongue. The problem with that method is that only about 20 to 30% of the THC or CBD and all the other rich cannabinoids get into your bloodstream. I always say it's not how much vitamin C you take, it's about how much vitamin C gets into your bloodstream that actually is going to make an impact on your body. So for the last 20 years, the pharmaceutical industry has had much more sophisticated technology, partly because they're the pharmaceutical industry, and also because the drugs that they're putting into our body are quite expensive, right? That take years to develop. And so we've been using a liposomal technology. What it means is that every molecule of CBD and THC is wrapped in a molecule of fat. So it's actually based from soy and lecithin, so it's natural. And your body wants to gobble up that fat. Your body just has a way of wanting to take fat in. So what our product is, you spray it under your tongue, you hold it there for about 2 minutes. It's like brushing your teeth. I always say brushing your teeth for 2 minutes seems like infinity. But when you do that, about 80 to 90% goes directly into your bloodstream under your tongue. It doesn't get processed in your digestive tract. Your digestive tract really has a lot of enzymes to break down food particles. So this crosses directly into the blood. And so we've done tests where your standard MCT oil that's in a dropper. So we've had people take 12 milligrams of standard tincture and 12 milligrams of nano-5. After 20 minutes, there is no milligrams of CBD from the standard tincture in the bloodstream, and there was 7 milligrams of CBD from nano-5. So Sunderstorm really is about bringing science to cannabis, taking some of these best practices from other industries and applying them to cannabis so that we can have products that are more effective. Because whether you're using it for, kind of social lubrication or for medical purposes, you still want to get the full effect of the THC that's in the products that you're buying.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It all comes down to that quality, right? And so what other innovative technologies or methods is Sunderstorm looking at when it comes to the future?
So we recently introduced the first nano gummy, first nano edible in California. We did that about a year ago. It's a different technology, but the effect is the same. One of the problems of edibles, as we know, is you take a cookie and you wait 45 minutes to an hour, you don't feel anything, you double up, and then like an hour after that, you're sitting in the corner or on the couch, really not having the experience that you were looking for, I don't think.
Yes.
So we have a rapid onset gummy that hits in 15 to 20 minutes. So suddenly you can actually take an edible, experience it more quickly, and have it absorbed quickly, so you actually get the full effect earlier. So it's a little bit different journey. It's front loaded and a little bit slower on the back end, whereas a typical edible is not front loaded, it's back loaded, and it can kind of keep being there behind the scenes, for maybe longer than you want. So we find that about 25% of our consumers in California take our nano product, and we get rave reviews from it. It's actually the product that I use when I go to a gummy. It's very reliable, quick onset, so you know what you're getting, quickly.
Yeah, I mean that is key. You hit the nail on the head when we talked earlier about precision dosing, but specifically edibles, right? I mean, there's so many people that you mentioned that I know that would take an edible, doesn't hit them. They wait about 40 minutes to an hour. They pop maybe one or two, and boom, they're on the moon, and then they never want to come back or have that experience again because like you said, that edible was backloaded and not front loaded. So that's another huge differentiator for y'all. You mentioned CBD and THC. Is there any other minor cannabinoids that Sunderstorm is looking into, say like CBG or CBN?
Yes. So we actually just we have a sleep gummy. I mean, one of the biggest, I think, health issues facing the country is sleep. A combination of getting to sleep because your mind is, on the monkey mind, thinking about too many things. And the second issue is staying asleep, which I think, particularly affects older people. So we just came out and reformulated our sleep gummy called Tranquility. Our Tranquility gummy now has 5 milligrams of CBD, 5 milligrams of THC, and 5 milligrams of CBN. So CBN is now in the news. The early research indicates that it's perhaps the best sedative of any of the cannabinoids. It's a very expensive cannabinoid because it doesn't naturally occur in the plant like CBD and THC do. But we just came out with a product that has that. It also has 1 milligram of melatonin. So melatonin is good to coax you to sleep. You don't want to take too much because your body naturally produces melatonin. If you take too much melatonin, then your body doesn't actually manufacture melatonin. So you have to be very careful. So we've designed this with just a touch of melatonin, not enough for your body to stop promoting it, but enough for you to kind of get sleep to kick in. And then we have sleep terpenes, which are indica terpenes added to it. We have that in a gummy form, and we have that in an oral spray form. So we're just coming out with a big sleep campaign from a marketing perspective, which will be launched imminently. But what we're finding is that the Tranquility gummy is selling out in our customer stores. So we're finding that there is a big need for sleep, that a lot of consumers and patients are going to cannabis stores because they hear from word of mouth that cannabis products can help with their sleep. And they're tired of taking, pharmaceutical sleep medicine that they know have effects of, impacting their organs and other things. I mean, pharmaceutical drugs are very, very strong. These cannabis products are basically from a natural product. And so, your body's able to digest them, and it's not able to screw up the things that you don't want to have screwed up.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the need for sleep in this country is definitely an issue, rising issue. And so the fact that you can look to more alternative remedies like cannabinoid, CBN, like you said, has been shown to help with sleep, and it's a sedative compared to the pharmaceuticals like Ambien and other things where we've all heard horror stories with those. Seems like a really good alternative, and it seems like a good place for y'all to position yourselves in the market to offer that product.
And again, it's about, blending science with cannabis, right? So cannabis has a long history ahead of it. I mean, it's had thousands of year history behind it. So it's part of this arc. But now cannabis is going to move into science. I think one of the best things that can happen with the Democratic victory would be like easing up on the ability of universities to do research. So there are many universities that want to basically implement research on cannabis. We need that as a manufacturer and a brand. So we look forward to having that research guide us in the products that we create in the future.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that cannabis legalization is ultimately a bipartisan issue. Timing, I think, like we talked about earlier, will definitely factor into who wins the presidency come November 3rd, which will be very interesting to see how things play out. But Keith, hey, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your insights. Is there anything that you want to cover or talk about before we sign off here?
Just one thing. We just made an announcement this week that we're finally leaving California. We will be operational in the first quarter in Colorado, and we will be operational in the first quarter of next year in Massachusetts. And we signed a licensing deal in Canada, so our Kana gummies should be available in Canada before the end of this year.
Awesome. Well, hey, if you have any press releases or links to those, feel free to send them to us, and we'll add them to this video description below.
Sounds great. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. It was fun.
Yes, it was very fun. Thank you so much again, and I hope that everybody also got as much out of it as I did. So thanks for listening, everybody. Bye.